Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Never had I done so much for a criminal client who appreciated it less. And when he came to my office and he told me that he had been a World War II prisoner of war in a Japanese camp and they were nasty, I should have given that more weight than I did at first. I had this guy was a big problem figuring him out. And later on in our relationship, his brother showed up at my office to apologize for Marty, my client's conduct. And his brother had just retired. He was a NYPD, very, very high-ranking officer, just below a chief. And he said, "Rudy, please forgive my brother. He's ungrateful. He's totally crazy. He's never been the same since he came back from the war, and he's been crazy ever since then." And he said, "He's ungrateful, as I said, but we know, the whole family knows what you've done for him, and we appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts." He said, "But I'm going to tell you a story of how crazy my brother is. My brother, and then and his behavior, which is typical. He's a con man." He said, "My brother, he belongs to a synagogue. He claims to be religious, and he belongs to the synagogue. And every year they have fundraising events for the United Jewish Appeal, the UJA, or Israel Defense. And my brother's the first guy up with a $10,000 pledge. And the whole thing is phony. He doesn't have any money." He said, "But he makes the pledge. And okay, then when everything quiets down, he visits the rabbi and he talks to the rabbi and the treasurer and tells them some cockamamie story about how he doesn't have any money, business was bad, he thought he had it, this, that." They realize, he's done it a number of times, they realize that he's a phony. But his getting up and making that pledge at the beginning and the big excitement sparks the whole place, and it kicks off a whole chain reaction of very numerous and generous big pledges from other people who follow through and actually give the money. So that the rabbi and the treasurer, they like the idea that he gets up and does that. They even made him man of the year in our synagogue, he said. That's my brother Marty. He says he's crazy. He said, but he's a con man, and he believes he's a good guy. He'll tell you he's wonderful. Well, Marty was referred to me by another client who was, let's call him a private banker. He was an expert in lending and collecting money and in many aspects of the criminal law, even though he wasn't a lawyer. He learned his trade sitting in Sing Sing, waiting to be electrocuted for 37 months. And he was a tough guy. And he recommended Marty to me, which was lucky for me because my client, the guy who recommended him, the referring party, was the reason I got paid in full. Because Marty was a career liar, and he never paid anybody in full until he met me. And it wasn't because of me. It was because of the reference from my other client. So Marty himself was in his 60s, and he was a very smooth guy, as you can imagine, because he was a con man. His whole life was a tangle of jumbled falsehoods. I mean, there were contradictions and craziness all over the place. His whole place was reminiscent of his whole life was reminiscent of the old line by Shakespeare, "Oh, what tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive." Well, that was Marty's life. Another friend of mine, Herbie Lyons, who was a tremendous criminal defense lawyer, told me once, he said, "Rudy, there are some guys, some people," he says, "that are incapable of traveling a straight line between point A and point B. They can't do it." He says, "They just can't do it." And Marty was one of those guys. There was nothing straight about him. His forte was insurance fraud. He had been an insurance broker, and he was kind of defrocked. He lost his license. And his whole shtick was pretty simple. He would write up or have somebody else write up. When he lost his license, it was no big deal because he would deal with other crooked guys in the business. And he would write up claims, 6 or 7 different claims with 6 or 7 different insurance carriers, auto insurers, for the same accident. He would collect checks on all of these different accidents and pay off whoever he had to pay off, helping him to make these claims and put these policies in operation. And he got caught by accident, and no pun intended. There was an auto squad detective from the New York Police Department who had been investigating a chop shop for 2 years. And the reason why he was investigating this chop shop for 2 years, one of the reasons was the owner of the chop shop was a particularly violent guy who was not above breaking arms and legs of anybody he disagreed with, whether they be customers or thieves or whatever. And a chop shop, for those who don't know, is either an auto body collision repair business or a scrap metal business, a junkyard. And what they do is they take a full car and chop it up, take it apart for parts. Because in this day and age, parts are hard to come by, and automobiles are basically, modern automobiles are made sometimes in 50 different in parts, and they're assembled in 50 different countries. The parts come from here or there, and they get assembled over here, and then they get sent back, and they get another thing from somebody else, and they change all the time. So getting spare parts can be new spare parts can be very expensive and time consuming, and a whole new I guess financial or economic equation is formed, because what happened, these guys found out if you chop up a car and strip it for all the different parts, you can sell those parts for more than the whole car was worth. If you sold the whole car as a used car, you could actually sell the parts and make more money, because everything got to be that much more expensive and that much more time consuming to get, and more difficult. So there was a whole thing out there. In the underworld, the saying was that all of Eastern Europe and most of South America and a good part of Africa were driving around with stolen cars, which were sometimes they would just lift the car and sell the car wholesale and ship them overseas and sell them wholesale. But there was a big business to be made by chopping up the cars. And so this young policeman, the detective, had done a really good, he had an axe to grind, because he knew this guy that owned it was dangerous. And he went out and did his real homework, and he got an actual bona fide, rare, kick in the door search warrant. When I say rare, because most cops in New York use a Tom McCann warrant. A Tom McCann warrant gets its name from the old retail shoe store in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, Tom McCann's. And instead of getting a warrant and going through the trouble, which most times they couldn't overcome the legal hurdles, they would just kick the door in with the shoes that they were wearing, and the cops would call that, in their sense of humor, black sense of humor, a Tom McCann warrant. But this guy had a legitimate search warrant, this young cop, because he did his homework and he did a lot of due diligence. And by accident, Marty was discovered because they found checks made out to him and claims, and then they started seeing the claims were from the same vehicle. So they had the paper trail, and they indicted him 42 counts, amounting to approximately $250,000 in illegally obtained funds, claim satisfaction funds from the insurance carriers. Well, it took 18 months for this case to proceed and wind down. And the most exciting thing in the 18 months was me trying to get paid from Marty, because it was against his religion. He didn't want to pay anybody. And he somehow or other, he was supposedly a religious guy and everything. He told himself he wasn't guilty, in the course of considering this indictment. He conned himself into it. I mean, people do all kinds of things, crazy things. I once represented a gypsy who told me that gypsies were allowed to steal without the penalty of sin. I said, what? He says, yeah, it's not a sin for gypsies to steal. Don't you know? I says, no, I didn't know, but I'm listening. Why not? He says, well, this goes back to when Christ was crucified. The Romans crucified him, the Roman soldiers. They had 4 nails, and a gypsy stole one of the nails. And from that day forward, Christ said, you could steal, because they only had 3 nails left for the crucifixion. And so people tell themselves all forms of self-justification, and it comes in crazy stories like the gypsy stories. And Morty told himself he wasn't guilty. I don't know how he figured it out, but he figured it out. He wasn't guilty. Well, the judge that had the case, and it was an involved case, because we had cops involved in the case that had been indicted, the chop shop guys, the guys who were out, the thieves who were out stealing. And by the way, sometimes this was so profitable that if they needed a part for a car and they didn't have the part, they would send somebody out to steal the whole car and then bring it in and chop it up. and then take the part they needed and then all the other parts. It was a wild business. It's a wild west out there. And this judge was one of himself. He was a former criminal defense lawyer, and he was a lovely guy. And he was one of two guys, no fool. He was one of two guys. He was lucky because basically, in the scheme of things, in this whole investigation, he was a minor player. And the judge offered probation in this case, 5 years probation, an E felony in satisfaction of the 42 counts of the indictment, but probation on one condition. And that was that Marty would have to pay $250,000 in restitution, $50,000 annually at the beginning of the next year, as a condition to get probation extended for the next year. He had to do that for 5 years because the judge offered that. And he even threw in, we ended up with another 56 count indictment with 56 more, and the judge threw that in. And the reason why they wanted to make a plea bargain, it sounds good. Well, there's a lot of reasons behind that. First of all, if every criminal who's arrested and charged asks for a trial, the whole system will break down. We don't have the resources, the time, or the people, or the money to try the cases. There has to be plea bargains to keep the system moving. Otherwise, it'll grind to a halt, and there'll be chaos. Second of all, like it or not, in the criminal courts, judges and lawyers, even prosecutors, have a different attitude towards white-collar crime because, let's face it, they're dealing with murderers, maimers, arsonists, the nastiest kinds of people, crooks, robbers, all kinds of terrible, terrible people who go around assaulting other people. And every once in a while, they come upon a white-collar criminal who's clean-cut and steals with a pen rather than a gun and doesn't do any violence or anything else. Relatively speaking, that guy is easy to dismiss as no big problem. And that attitude is prevalent in the criminal courts. That's why traditionally people go easier on white-collar crime. Even today, on another scale, if you look in the newspaper on any day, you'll see giant organizations, credit card companies, banks, worldwide banks, getting fines, and nobody gets convicted of. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody goes to jail. In fact, the federal prosecutor wrote a book about it, about the phenomenon called chicken shit. And they don't go to jail, and they don't even admit doing any wrongdoing. The reason they get away with it is they pay it's money, and these things are so-called victimless crimes. And in Marty's case, the judge knew he was ripping off insurance companies who are no angels themselves. The auto insurance companies get away with murder every day, and they have the legislature on their side and a lot of laws on their side, and they get away with all kinds of abuse. So judges don't feel necessarily compelled to put these people in jail. And remarkably enough, Marty had no criminal record. He lost his license as an insurance agent, but he had no criminal record up until that time. And here he was in his mid-60s. Plus, he was a war veteran, and he was a prisoner of war. And that was the real thing. So we had a good deal. All I needed, and now we're talking about 42 and 56. What is that? That's 98 counts going away. Only has to do restitution. Now, no jail, a sentence involving no jail in the criminal courts is a home run. It's a grand slam home run. Anybody would take that. And I needed Marty's assent to do this. And I go out, and we had 2 days to do this because the judge was negotiating and they were negotiating other pleas. They were trying to wrap up this case because the prosecutors, this was complicated, and this would take tremendous resources and years to finish up all the defendants in this case. So they were looking to dispose of the stuff and get pleas wherever they could, naturally, for reasons of economy, and they wanted to do that. Okay, so I have 2 days. I go out there, and my friend Marty, he won't consent taking a plea. No, I'm not taking a plea. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. Now, eventually, I don't know what to do. Nobody believes this. The other people. There was a young cop who was a rookie who went away for 6 months. The cop, he was tangentially involved in this whole thing. He went away for 6 months. He went to jail. They put a cop in jail. And they put other guys in jail. The chop shop guy went to jail. So many of them. Some of the thieves went to jail. And here's Marty getting off with no jail. And all he has to do is make restitution. And by the way, he stole a lot more than $250,000 over the 2 indictments. And he wouldn't do it. So the judge said, Rudy, all right, here's what we're going to do. You got 15 more minutes to go out and persuade this guy to take it. Otherwise, I'm going to withdraw and we'll put him on trial. The hell with him. he'll go to trial. And he's going to get convicted. Now, I go outside, I show Marty, here's evidence. They have checks with your initials and your signatures on them. Many of them, all right? They have a card that says, you are a minister of the church of what's happening now. Does anybody know because you joined for tax purposes, does anybody in your synagogue know that you're a Christian minister, Marty? And that didn't shake him, okay? He's a con man. All he kept saying, I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to deal, I didn't do anything, and I'm not going to take a plea. So I said, we have 15 more minutes. I go outside. I said, Marty, this is your last chance. And he's in high gear. Why should I pay? Why should I pay? Why should I pay? Now, one of the co-counsel, who was familiar with all of this and watched this going on, he said, Marty, what's the matter with you? Do you know that you're getting a fabulous deal here? Okay? And he says, well, why should I pay? Why should I pay? And my colleague told him right off the spot, because you stole the fucking money, Marty. That's why you have to pay. I didn't steal the money. I'm not paying. Rudy didn't steal the money. Rudy's not paying. You didn't cut us in on the money. None of us are paying. You stole it. And it's only part of what you stole. So get in there and pay and get out of this, because look around. And he pointed to the people walking around in the criminal court. He says, you see all these young guys? They're all going to Rikers Island and the state prison and everything else. He says, you know what they'll do with you, a guy like you in your age, in your 60s? You go to jail. These guys, a lot of them are violent and they're predatory. They will eat you alive in jail. Guys like you don't belong in jail with young guys like this. They'll tear you apart. He said, and they'll leave you laying on the floor in a puddle. He said, now, get in there and take the plea and stop with the nonsense. And Marty put his head down. Apparently that did it. And he went in and he took the plea. The judge said, okay, we're going to set this down for sentencing. You're going to be sentenced in 6 weeks. I have to. There's a mandatory sentencing report that has to be done. If everything holds up and you didn't do anything else, I'm going to do this. And when you come back for sentencing, okay, you make sure you have the first $50,000 certified check or in cash as an installment on your probation for the first year, and you're going to pay that for the next 4 years. Is that understood? Okay, Judge. And he said, and if you don't have the money, bring your toothbrush. That's it. Okay, we go out. Next 6 weeks, Marty wouldn't even speak to me. Okay? Come sentencing day, he shows up, I'm there, and the judge says, okay, sir, time for your sentence. I'm ready to sentence. Now I have to ask you, do you have the $50,000 I told you to have as a condition of your probation for this coming year? Oh, Judge, Marty says, it's High Holy Days coming up. I'm very religious. I've been preparing for High Holy Days. I really have no time to go and get them. Okay, the judge says, okay, that's okay. Remand the defendant. And I do the famous lawyer sidestep. And the court officers come up behind Marty, get him by one arm each, put his arms behind his back and cuff him and march him out the door. That night is when his brother showed up and apologized to me and told me how crazy his brother was, etc., etc. The next morning, Marty's oldest son comes to my office with the $50,000, and we walk across and pay the clerk, deposit the money with the clerk, and Marty gets sentenced. The kid is apologizing. I said, you don't have to apologize. I understand the whole thing. Don't worry about it. It's no big thing. Marty hated me forever. After I would see him on the street until he died, he hated me because he had to pay in full. And I'm probably one of the few people in his life he had to pay in full. And then he had to pay restitution, which was probably against his constitution. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.